Hey guys, what's going on? It's me, Jay. Yeah, I'm here to talk about the Diddy trial. Yeah, the Diddy trial happened yesterday. The verdict was finally reached. The jury of his peers, Judge Sean Combs, and surprisingly enough, it was a split kind of. You had uh, he, five charges coming against him, and he was only convicted of two. All right, only convicted of two out of the five, and those two were uh, he's been found guilty of transportation for prostitution charges, but has been found not guilty for sex trafficking and racketeering conspiracy. So when it came to the federal charges of the RICO law, that he was not found guilty of. So basically, the minor charges he was found guilty of, the major charges that would have put him away for probably the rest of his life, he was found not guilty of. And you wonder why that was the case. You know what I mean? Why uh why didn't he get the major charges? What went wrong in on Cassie's side that they weren't able to prove that he was guilty of this to the jury? Or could it have been a bias in his favor? I mean, he is a prominent businessman in New York. He has a lot of properties from New York. He represented New York on the rap scene, probably the king of New York rap, East Coast style hip hop. Uh, the equivalent of a Dr. Dre on the West Coast or a Birdman in the South, perhaps, in the clout and influence that they have over the music scene in that particular area. So, and he's from New York. I mean, you go back into Diddy's history, his father had ties with Nicky Barnes, back in the 70s in Harlem, you know, uh, you know, in that inner circle, of those powers, movers and shakers and associates of the mafia and that underworld. So P Diddy, Puffy, Sean Combs, he's always had influence in NYC. So that could have, and the jury was among uh, New Yorkers. So had they had the trial in some other part of the country, maybe things would have been different. Also, when it came to Cassie, a lot of her case fell apart when it was discovered that she would do these freak offs without Diddy being there. So if she was doing them without Diddy being there, it made it look like she was a willing participant, right? That she was liking the freak offs, and then she then became the abused became the abuser to other people. You know what I mean? If you uh, classify this as abuse, which I do. And that's another thing. They didn't bring Diddy up on any domestic violence charges related to the video showing, the video that was shown around on TMZ of him beating her in the hallway. You know what I mean? So they didn't bring him on that. They tried to get it like he was running, racketeering in a corrupt organization act. We talked about it several times on the channel, passed in the 1970s to target the mafia. Because what would happen, and eventually did bring down um, uh, most of the heads of the five families, or the five families of New York and the nine families of nationwide. So, because what would happen when it came to the mafia is similar to like terrorist organizations. You take one out, and another one rises in his stead. So the government said, well, there has to be a way to not just target individuals, but to target organizations, and that's eventually how they did it. And they've used this sort of thing against mega street gangs, for example, the Latin Kings, Operation Broken Crown, Nuestra Familia, Operation Black Widow. They've had several. They've targeted them. They've targeted the Mexican Mafia, the Aryan Brotherhood, all these organizations. But recently, this sort of law has been turned on to hip hop now. Hip hop labels and hip hop crews and crews and groups that are operating on a business sense. If the government wants to, they can use that. They can use the strong arm of the law and the RICO Act to target these organizations as corrupt organizations, as extensions of organized crime, just based on the environments and the areas of the country and the areas of the world that they come from, and that they're largely African American, largely Black organizations that are prosperous, sometimes even more prosperous than your average, policeman, obviously, or detective, more richer, more wealthier, more influential, and there's jealousy there. So they're going to use this. The government is, I believe, the RICO Act. If Diddy had been convicted of it, which he was not, but I'm saying if he had, they were going to start to use this as a threat. That if record labels and music labels and stuff become too big for their britches, too sophisticated or too rebellious against the status quo, against the confines of white supremacy, that they would use the RICO Act to target these organizations, because with money is power. And as important as electoral politics often are, it is with money and the acquisition of with money and with influence that the acquisition of power and the ascension of power becomes much more easier. And the government knows that. You know what I mean? And we see it with here. Did he not have the power on a local level that he had, and had he not had the influence in a nationwide level, being a big star, in the music business, and the face of like I said, the face of East Coast hip hop, had he not been that icon, would he have gotten out of this case? If an everyday average Joe was faced with the same exact situation, would he have gotten out? Of course not. You know what I mean? Again, money, influence, power. This is the kind of things that Diddy had, and and you know he's gonna be. It's gonna be a case, and it's gonna be analyzed for decades. You know what I mean? They're gonna look at this and they're gonna go, well, how did this guy become this? You know what I mean? There's gonna be psychoanalysis books written about Diddy and how Diddy became, the power mogul that he became, and what went wrong as far as a screw loose in his head. What was his upbringing? We heard during the trial so much about his mom. You know what I mean? And how she was so weird, and the things that she would have, and the proclivities, the sexual proclivities that she had. And it'd be interesting to see when a man becomes so powerful, like Diddy became, regular sexual conquests don't appease him anymore. You know what I mean? He's not turned on by even the hottest girl that he could manage to bed. He wants more. He wants to keep pushing the envelope. And given that, I think Diddy was a man obsessed with power. What he could do with power, how he could crush his competition with power. He was very Machiavellian in that sense. Pardon the pun, because of course Machiavelli was the other rap name of Tupac, who was of course Diddy's main adversary in the '90s. But he became so obsessed with power that he became paranoid and afraid to lose it. And he was obsessed with the ability to manipulate situations and manipulate people. You know, but what I think is conflicting to a lot of folks is they really thought a lot of people really believed in the justice system and that he would get the maximum and that his power and his influence wouldn't be a factor in the court case and his fame, right? And what he meant to probably the generations of jurors that were there. You know what I mean? Because listen, you can't talk about pop culture in the millennial context without talking about P. Diddy. P. Diddy was very influential, not only with Bad Boy, but just his persona, right? Bad Boy had there a couple of years from the time that Biggie died in March of 1997 till about the rest of 1997. Everything was Bad Boy. It was like a celebration of Bad Boy, a celebration of Big, and everything. And after that, kind of other labels came about. Rough Riders, Jay Z really got established with Rockefeller, and they kind of Murder Inc. and G Unit and all them. They kind of took the place of Diddy, but he still remained a large presence and still remained influential. Every once in a while, you would hear about a new rap on Bad Boys, such as French Montana or this one and that one, and like going out with Ciroc and making all that stuff. So he influenced these people, these jurors, and they then used it was imprinted in their mind. They had grown up with him. Same with Michael Jackson. Same with OJ. That's the problem with these high-profile cases. And I'm not saying that OJ. I'm not weighing in on the OJ situation. That's old hat. But you know what I mean? Like, uh, you know, people's celebrity does influence the jurors. Just like it influences voters. We talk about guys like Trump, guys like uh, uh, Sonny Bono, guys like Jesse Ventura, guys like Arnold Schwarzenegger. Why did they get elected? Because they had fame and name recognition. And unfortunately, that works the same way in the justice system, folks. So anyway, peace. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Diddy is going to jail for I think like 10 to 20 at least, I believe. But unfortunately, he didn't get the maximum. Peace.